took pills to cope with my depression, but a random phone call saved my life. My first response didn't win, but I really want to share this anyway because this happened to my friend and she just told me about it today. This is not her story, it's mine, but I got her permission to tell it. This happened 5 years ago. I was 18 and up until this point I was your average happy-go-lucky kid, but things took a turn when I was hit with a bipolar-like state. Now, I was the type of kid who prided himself in his optimism, so when I started slipping into this state it threw everything off, my grades, my friends, my outlook on life, my everything. Since I was a teenager, I of course thought I knew everything and tried to get rid of it on my own, but it didn't take long for me to realize that I couldn't deal with it on my own, so I went to a doctor. This is where my story begins. After I told her about how I felt, how I had been depressed for at least a month, if not longer, and that there was no light in my life whatsoever and was in fact suicidal, she asked me if I was going to hurt myself. I told her that I wasn't just yet, but if I didn't get better soon, I would. She said that I could stay for a day, but that I should consider taking one of the pills I would get from her. In my lack of knowledge, I did not know better back then, and I decided to take the pills. 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 3, and so on. I didn't tell anyone, cause I figured I could get better on my own this way. It took me 4 months to get to a point where I realized I shouldn't have been taking the pills, so I threw them all away, or so I thought. I found that there were a few left in the box later on. After several conversations with my mom, I decided to throw them away, but somewhere between my thought of throwing them away and actually throwing them in the bin I changed my mind. These thoughts seeped into my mind for a few days before I finally gave in and took one more. At this point I realized I would be useless without the one I had taken. I had built up the urge to take one after a few days. These were the darkest days of my life, and I didn't want myself to go through that pain again, but I went for it anyway. By now I wasn't talking to anyone, and spent most of my days in bed. One day, say, a week after taking the pill, I heard my phone ringing. I didn't really want to get up, but I knew someone was calling me, so I grabbed the phone and answered. It was a guy who was looking for someone else, but upon hearing my voice he was surprised, and said something along the lines of "No way, it can't be her, right?" We then had a 2-minute conversation where I think I told him to F off once we got cut off, but we got reconnected shortly after. He is on probation, and we have known each other since junior high, and he was just looking for a friend to catch up with, so we talked a little while before he got cut off again. As you can probably guess, we talked for another half an hour after this, and during this time he somehow convinced me to call a crisis line and talk to someone. I didn't want to do it, but he insisted. I was quite annoyed at this point, so, without giving it much thought, I did it. I told her my story, and to my surprise she wouldn't let me go. She told me that I shouldn't have made the decision to take one, since I was in a messed up state of mind. This of course made me quite angry, having been yelled at by someone I didn't even know, who sounded anything but professional. Somehow, as spiteful as I was feeling, I still called my doctor and told her what had happened, as well as told her that I didn't want to go to the hospital. I guess this next part was the turning point, because I never thought something like this could actually happen. The police came to my house, knocked on the door and told me that I was to be hospitalized for 2 weeks without option. So, without saying a single word, I grabbed a small bag and we went to the police car outside my house and drove to the hospital. 2 days later I found out that he called his probation officer, who called my school, who called social services, who called the police, and so on. I stayed with him a little while longer, and when the counselor decided it was time for me to go to bed, I told him that I would expect him to come see me tomorrow, since he was the one who convinced me to do this in the first place. He told me he had to work, which I severely misunderstood as him not caring. After all, the last people I had talked to before I decided to go to bed was my mother, the male nurse when he came to take my blood, and the counselor when he said hello when I went to bed. I started ripping him apart for how inconsiderate he was for not coming back, which I regret now, but it just went downhill from there. I went to bed, only to be woken up by a nurse 10 minutes later, who told me that I had to go see the psychiatrist. Another lady came and told me she was from social services, whose job it was to make sure I stayed in the hospital for the 2 weeks the doctor had deemed necessary for my recovery. The scene continued for the rest of the day, with more and more people coming to me and telling me they were here to help me. By the time my mother came to see me that evening, there was at least 10 people in the room, wanting to help me in any way they could. I looked at my mother, and told her that they all reminded me of the Charlie's Angels reboot. As you can guess, this made her laugh.